Every day, amidst the bustling chaos of the city's busiest animal shelter, one small figure stood out. A tiny, scruffy puppy would sit just outside the iron gates, his wide, pleading eyes following every person who walked by. Yet, day after day, he remained ignored, overlooked by the staff rushing to complete their shifts and dismissed as just another stray by the workers who saw animals as part of their daily grind. But for Emily, a young volunteer with a heart full of compassion, this puppy's quiet persistence was impossible to ignore. Why did he keep coming back? And what was he waiting for? The air around the shelter was filled with the usual sounds of barking dogs and meowing cats, the clanging of feeding bowls echoing against concrete walls. Workers in uniforms moved with hurried efficiency, tending to the long rows of kennels. They exchanged quick greetings, their minds focused on the endless to-do list that came with caring for dozens of animals. For most, it was just a job, something to pay the bills. But for Emily, every moment spent at the shelter was a calling. She didn't clock in or out. She showed up because she loved the animals and wanted to make a difference. It was on a chilly Monday morning, just as Emily was unloading bags of donated pet food from her car, that she noticed the puppy for the first time. He was sitting just beyond the gate, his fur matted and dirty, his small frame trembling in the crisp autumn breeze. Unlike the shelter dogs, who barked or wagged their tails at the sight of people, this little one sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the shelter's entrance as though waiting for someone to notice him. Emily frowned as she approached, her arms still full of kibble bags. "What's your story, little guy?" she murmured. The puppy's ears perked up at her voice, but he didn't move closer. Instead, he simply stared at her, his eyes brimming with a mix of hope and sadness that tugged at her heart. "Hey, Emily, can you help with the feeding rotation?" a voice called from inside. It was one of the staff members, sounding slightly impatient. Emily hesitated, glancing between the puppy and the shelter entrance. "Be right there," she replied, setting down the bags of food. Before heading in, she crouched down and spoke softly to the pup. "Don't go anywhere, okay? I'll be back." But when Emily returned later that afternoon, the puppy was gone. Over the next few days, the routine repeated itself. Every morning, the puppy would sit just outside the gate, his small body shivering as he watched the comings and goings of the shelter staff. No one else seemed to pay him any attention, their focus firmly on the animals already inside. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about this little dog, something that demanded her attention. "What's up with that stray outside?" she asked one of the workers during a coffee break. "Which one?" the worker replied with a shrug. "Strays come and go all the time. If it's not inside the gate, it's not our problem." Emily's jaw tightened. To her, every animal mattered, whether or not they were officially part of the shelter, and so she decided to take matters into her own hands. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the last of the staff clocked out, Emily stayed behind. She carried a small bowl of food and a blanket to the gate, her heart pounding as she knelt down to meet the puppy's gaze. "I don't know who you're waiting for," she said softly, "but I'm here now." The puppy hesitated, his wary eyes scanning her face. Then, slowly, he inched closer, his nose twitching as he sniffed the food she'd brought. For the first time, Emily noticed the faint scars on his paws and the thinness of his frame. This wasn't just a stray. This was a dog with a story, one she was determined to uncover. The following morning, as Emily arrived at the shelter, she couldn't help but glance toward the gate. Sure enough, the little puppy was there, sitting in his usual spot, his small body curled up tightly against the cold. Emily's heart ached as she noticed how his breathing seemed shallow, his chest rising and falling rapidly. She set down her bag inside the shelter and hurried back out with a small bowl of water and some soft food. "Hey, little one," she said gently, kneeling by the gate. "Did you sleep here all night?" The puppy didn't respond, of course, but his eyes locked on hers, full of an unspoken plea. Emily slid the bowl of food under the gate and watched as the dog hesitated before cautiously stepping forward to eat. He kept one eye on her the entire time, his movements slow and deliberate. From behind her, a voice called out, "Emily, you're gonna spoil that stray. He'll never leave if you keep feeding him." It was one of the shelter workers, a man named Dave, who had been at the job for years, but rarely showed much enthusiasm. Emily turned to him with a frown. "Maybe he doesn't want to leave." "Did you ever think of that?" Dave shrugged, sipping his coffee. "It's just another stray." We can't take in every animal that shows up outside. We barely have room for the ones inside." Emily bit back a retort. She understood the challenges of running a shelter, the limited space, the constant influx of animals, and the never-ending struggle for funding. But something about this puppy was different. He wasn't just wandering by or looking for scraps. He was waiting for something or someone. Over the next few days, Emily made it her mission to build the puppy's trust. Each morning and evening, she brought him food and water, speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones. Slowly but surely, the puppy began to inch closer, his initial wariness giving way to cautious curiosity. By the end of the week, he was letting her sit just a few feet away while he ate, his tail wagging faintly whenever she spoke to him. "Why don't you just bring him inside?" Sarah, another volunteer, asked one afternoon as she watched Emily interact with the puppy. Emily sighed. "I've tried, but he won't let me pick him up. He's skittish, like he's afraid of being confined. I don't want to scare him off." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe he's been hurt before. Some strays have a harder time trusting people, especially if they've been abandoned." Emily's chest tightened at the thought. She couldn't imagine anyone abandoning this sweet, loyal little dog, but she also knew it happened all too often. She resolved to be patient, to give the puppy the time and space he needed to feel safe. One evening, as Emily prepared to leave the shelter, she noticed the puppy wasn't at the gate. Panic flickered in her chest. Had something happened to him? Had he given up and wandered off? Grabbing a flashlight, she walked around the block, calling out softly, "Hey, Blake! Where are you?" Her search led her to a small alleyway behind the shelter, where she found the puppy curled up against a pile of old cardboard boxes. His body shivered visibly in the cool night air, and his eyes flicked open as the beam of her flashlight landed on him. "There you are," Emily said, relief flooding her voice. She crouched down, holding out her hand. "Why are you back here? Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." The puppy whimpered softly, but didn't move. Emily noticed a faint limp as he shifted his weight, and her heart sank. "You're hurt, aren't you?" she murmured. Without thinking, she removed her jacket and draped it gently over the little dog. "It's okay. I'm here." Slowly, she extended her arms, giving him plenty of time to back away if he wanted to. But to her surprise, the puppy didn't resist as she scooped him up. He trembled in her arms, his small frame so light it was almost alarming. Emily held him close, whispering soothing words as she carried him back toward the shelter. Inside, she found an empty kennel and carefully placed the puppy inside, adding a soft blanket and a bowl of water. "This is just for tonight," she promised, stroking his head gently. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out what's next." For the first time, the puppy looked at her without fear. His eyes, though tired, seemed to convey a glimmer of trust. Emily smiled, a sense of hope blooming in her chest. She had finally brought him inside, but the real work was just beginning. The next morning, Emily arrived at the shelter early, eager to check on the puppy. As she approached the kennel, she saw him curled up on the blanket she'd left for him, his head resting on his paws. He looked up as she entered, his ears perking slightly. It wasn't much, but to Emily it felt like progress. "Good morning, Blake," she said softly, crouching beside the kennel. She opened the door slowly, careful not to startle him. To her delight, the puppy didn't shy away as she reached in to stroke his head. His fur was still matted, but his eyes looked a little brighter, his body a little less tense. Emily grabbed a leash and clipped it to the small collar she had slipped onto him the night before. "Let's get you checked out," she said, lifting him gently. The shelter's vet, Dr. Martinez, was already in the exam room, prepping for the day's appointments. "Is this the stray you've been fussing over?" Dr. Martinez asked with a teasing smile as Emily brought the puppy in. "Guilty," Emily admitted. "But look at him, how could anyone ignore this face?" Dr. Martinez chuckled and gestured for Emily to place the puppy on the exam table. As she began her assessment, Emily explained how she'd found him in the alleyway and his hesitance to trust anyone. "I think he's been through something," she added, her voice tinged with concern. Dr. Martinez nodded. "It's possible. Let's see what we're dealing with." The examination revealed a minor sprain in the puppy's front leg, likely from slipping or tripping. "It's nothing serious," Dr. Martinez reassured Emily. "With rest and a little TLC, he'll be fine in a week or two." Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That's a relief. What about his overall health? Surprisingly good for a stray turn, Doctor, Martinez said, running her hands gently over the puppy's ribs. He's underweight, but no signs of major illness or injury. He's a fighter, Emily smiled, her heart swelling with affection. He deserves a chance. As the puppy settled into his temporary kennel, Emily began to wonder about his story. Where had he come from? Why had he been so determined to stay outside the shelter? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his presence than met the eye. Later that day, she brought the puppy a bowl of warm chicken and rice, sitting beside the kennel as he ate. "You're not just any stray, are you?" she mused aloud. "You were waiting for something, or someone." Her thoughts were interrupted by Sarah, who approached with a clipboard. "Hey, Emily, I noticed you've been spending a lot of time with him. Are you thinking about adopting?" Emily hesitated, her hand resting on the puppy's head. "I don't know. I feel like I need to figure out his story first. It's like he's waiting for me to understand." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You think someone abandoned him?" "Maybe," Emily said, glancing at the puppy. "Or maybe he got lost. Either way, I want to know." Determined to uncover the truth, Emily started by asking around the neighborhood. Armed with a few printed flyers featuring a photo of the puppy, she knocked on doors, hoping someone might recognize him. Most people shook their heads, offering polite apologies, but one elderly man paused when he saw the flyer. "That's the dog that's been sitting outside your shelter, isn't it?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Yes," Emily said, leaning forward eagerly. "Do you know anything about him?" The man scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I've seen him wandering around the area for a few weeks now, but he always seemed to head back toward your shelter, like he had a purpose." Emily's curiosity deepened. "Do you know where he might have come from?" The man shook his head. "Sorry, I don't. But if he's been hanging around the shelter, maybe he belonged to someone connected to it." The idea struck Emily like a lightning bolt. Could the puppy have been waiting for someone who used to work at the shelter, or maybe a former volunteer? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. If that were true, the puppy's loyalty ran deeper than she had imagined. Returning to the shelter, Emily approached Sarah with her theory. "What if he belonged to someone who used to come here?" she suggested. "Is there a way to check?" Sarah frowned thoughtfully. "We could look through the volunteer records or adoption logs, but it's a long shot. People come and go all the time." "Still," Emily said, her resolve firm, "it's worth trying." That evening, Emily sat in the shelter's office, poring over old files and records. The task was tedious, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the brink of discovering something important. As she flipped through a stack of adoption forms, a name caught her eye. Rebecca Harper. Rebecca had been a volunteer at the shelter several months ago, but according to the notes, she had stopped coming unexpectedly. The reason listed was vague. Personal circumstances. Emily's pulse quickened as she scanned the rest of the file. Attached was a photo of Rebecca holding a small puppy, a puppy that looked almost identical to the one now resting in the shelter. Her heart raced as she stared at the image. "Could it really be you?" she whispered. The discovery of Rebecca Harper's name set Emily on a new course. There was a sense of urgency now, as if the puppy's story were just within reach. Clutching the file, she headed to Sarah's desk, where her colleague was finishing up paperwork. "Sarah, do you remember Rebecca Harper?" Emily asked, setting the file down. Sarah glanced at the name and photo. "Yeah, I remember her. She volunteered here last year. She was one of the most dedicated people we had, always going above and beyond for the animals. But then, one day, she just stopped showing up. No explanation." Emily's brow furrowed. "Do you know what might have happened? Did she adopt this puppy?" Sarah tapped her pen against the desk thoughtfully. "She didn't officially adopt him. I think he was part of a litter we took in a while back. Rebecca spent a lot of time with them, but when she left, we assumed she found homes for them." "Why?" Emily hesitated. "I think this might be her puppy. He looks exactly like the one in the photo." Sarah's eyes widened. "If that's true, then why is he here? And why hasn't she come back for him?" "That's what I want to find out," Emily said, her determination growing. "Do you have any contact information for her?" Sarah pulled up Rebecca's volunteer records on the computer. "Here's her address and phone number, but it's from last year. There's no guarantee it's still accurate." "It's a start," Emily said, jotting down the details. "I'll follow up on it tomorrow." That night, Emily sat in her small apartment, unable to shake the image of Rebecca and the puppy. What could have caused someone so devoted to animals to abandon the shelter, and possibly her own dog? The questions circled her mind, keeping her awake long after midnight. The next morning, she decided to visit the address listed in the file. The neighborhood wasn't far from the shelter, a quiet row of modest houses with well-kept lawns. Emily parked her car and approached the house listed as Rebecca's. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding with anticipation. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft. "Hi, I'm Emily," she began nervously. "I work at the animal shelter in town. I'm looking for Rebecca Harper. Does she live here?" The woman's expression clouded. "Rebecca is my granddaughter. She used to live here, but she moved out several months ago." "Do you know where she went?" Emily asked, trying to hide her disappointment. The woman sighed. "She moved to the city. Said she needed a fresh start. She's been through a lot, you know." Emily's curiosity deepened. "A lot? What happened?" The woman hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Her mother passed away last year. It hit her hard. Rebecca started pulling away from everything she loved, even the animals at the shelter. I think she thought leaving would help her heal." Emily felt a pang of sympathy. Losing a parent was unimaginable, and it explained Rebecca's sudden departure. But it didn't answer the question of the puppy. "Did she leave behind a dog?" Emily asked gently. The woman shook her head. "Not that I know of. Rebecca adored animals. If she had a dog, she would have taken it with her." Emily thanked the woman and left, her mind racing. If Rebecca hadn't intentionally left the puppy behind, what had happened? Was it possible that the puppy had been separated from her during the move? Or worse, abandoned by someone else? Back at the shelter, Emily updated Sarah on what she'd learned. Rebecca's grandmother said she moved to the city and left everything behind after her mom passed, Emily explained. But she didn't mention the puppy. Sarah frowned. That doesn't add up. If Rebecca loved animals as much as we know she did, she wouldn't have just left him. Exactly, Emily said. I need to dig deeper. Maybe there's a way to track her down. With Sarah's help, Emily contacted a few people who had worked with Rebecca at the shelter. One former volunteer remembered Rebecca mentioning a job opportunity in the city, but couldn't recall any details. Another recalled her talking about a favorite park where she used to take the shelter dogs. That's it, Emily said, snapping her fingers. If Rebecca loved that park, maybe someone there knows her. The following afternoon, Emily visited the park, a sprawling green space with winding paths and a large off-leash area for dogs. She wandered the park with a flyer of the puppy, stopping to talk to dog owners and park staff. After several dead ends, an older man sitting on a bench perked up when he saw the flyer. I've seen that dog before, he said, pointing to the picture. Emily's heart leapt. You have? Where? He used to come here with a young woman, the man said. She had dark hair, always wore a baseball cap. They'd sit by the pond for hours, but I haven't seen her in months. Do you remember anything else about her? Emily asked. The man shook his head. Sorry, that's all I've got. Emily thanked him and left, her mind swirling with possibilities. Rebecca's connection to the puppy was becoming clearer, but the full story remained just out of reach. For now, she had only one certainty. This puppy had once been deeply loved, and Emily was determined to reunite them, no matter what it took. Emily returned to the shelter, her thoughts racing. The man at the park had confirmed the puppy's connection to Rebecca, but his information left more questions than answers. What had happened in the months since Rebecca's last visit? And why had the puppy ended up back at the shelter, waiting so desperately for her return? Determined to uncover the truth, Emily spent the evening poring over the shelter's records. She cross-referenced adoption files, intake reports, and Rebecca's volunteer logs, hoping to find a clue. Late into the night, something caught her eye. A record of a dog surrender that matched the puppy's description. The entry was dated just a few weeks after Rebecca's departure. The notes were sparse but telling. Male puppy, approx. 6 months old. Surrendered anonymously. Found tied to shelter gate after hours. No microchip or identifying tags. Emily's heart sank. The image of the tiny dog, frightened and alone, tied to the shelter gate was almost too much to bear. But the question remained. Who had left him there? And why? The next morning, Emily shared her findings with Sarah. The puppy was surrendered anonymously, Emily explained, her voice heavy with emotion. But it doesn't make sense. If Rebecca loved him, she wouldn't have done this. Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. Maybe it wasn't Rebecca. Someone else could have taken him after she left. That's what I'm thinking, Emily agreed. But how do we find out who? Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering their options. If the puppy was left at the gate, maybe the security cameras caught something. We don't usually check the footage unless there's a problem, but it's worth a shot. Emily's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. Let's do it. Together, they accessed the shelter's surveillance system and navigated to the date of the surrender. The grainy footage showed a quiet night outside the shelter with only the occasional passing car. As the timestamp approached the reported time of the surrender, a shadowy figure appeared in the frame. "Pause it," Emily said, leaning closer to the screen. Sarah froze the footage. The figure was partially obscured, their face hidden beneath a hood. They carried the puppy in one arm and a piece of rope in the other. The video showed them tying the puppy to the gate before walking away quickly, disappearing into the darkness. "It's too blurry to make out any details," Sarah said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But maybe someone recognizes them." Emily snapped a photo of the screen. "I'll ask around," she said. Someone in the neighborhood might have seen something. The rest of the day was spent canvassing the area around the shelter. Emily showed the photo to nearby business owners, delivery drivers, and anyone who might have been in the vicinity that night. Most people shook their heads, apologizing for not being able to help. But at a small diner a few blocks away, Emily found a lead. An employee named Carla studied the photo carefully. "I think I've seen this person before," she said slowly. "They come in here sometimes, always wearing that hoodie. Never talks much, just grabs coffee to go." Emily's heart raced. "Do you know their name?" Carla shook her head. "No, but I've seen them leave on a bike a couple of times. They always head toward the apartment complex on Elm Street." "Thank you," Emily said, her excitement bubbling over. "You've been a huge help." That evening, Emily drove to the apartment complex on Elm Street. It was a modest building with peeling paint and a small parking lot. She parked her car and approached the front entrance, unsure of her next move. There were dozens of units, and she had no idea which one belonged to the person in the video. As she stood there, debating her options, a young boy rode up on a bicycle. He stopped in front of her, eyeing her curiously. "Are you looking for someone?" he asked. "Yes, actually," Emily said, showing him the photo. "Have you seen this person around here?" The boy squinted at the image. "That's Mr. Jacob," he said, matter-of-factly. "He lives on the second floor, but he doesn't talk to people much." Emily's pulse quickened. "Thank you," she said, heading for the stairs. She found the unit easily enough, a plain door with peeling numbers and no decorations. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. There was no response at first, but after a few moments, the door creaked open. A man in his mid-30s stood there, his hoodie pulled low over his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice wary. "Are you Jacob?" Emily asked. The man's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "I work at the animal shelter," Emily said, keeping her tone calm. "I'm trying to find out what happened to this puppy." She held up the flyer. Jacob's expression shifted, guilt flickering across his face. "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly, starting to close the door. "Please wait," Emily said, stepping forward. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just want to understand what happened." Jacob hesitated, his grip on the door loosening. "Why do you care so much?" "Because this puppy is waiting for someone," Emily said softly. "I think he's waiting for Rebecca Harper, and if you know anything about her, I need to know." Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said reluctantly. "Come inside." Emily stepped into Jacob's modest apartment, her eyes scanning the sparse furnishings and the faint scent of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. Jacob gestured toward a worn-out chair while he sat on the edge of his couch, his posture tense. "You've got guts showing up here," he said, his voice laced with a mixture of irritation and resignation. "But I can tell you really care, so I'll tell you what I know." Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Please, anything you can share might help." Jacob hesitated, staring at the ground as though organizing his thoughts. "I knew Rebecca," he began. "Not well, but we lived in the same building for a while. She was one of the few people around here who was kind, I guess." always smiling even when things weren't great. What do you mean by weren't great? Emily asked. She didn't talk about it much, Jacob replied, but you could tell she was struggling, financially, emotionally, you name it. She loved that dog, though. Talked about him all the time. So why would someone leave him at the shelter? Emily pressed gently. Jacob sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. A few months back, Rebecca just disappeared. No one knew where she went, but rumors started flying. Some people said she got a job out of town. Others said she moved in with family. I didn't think much of it until I saw her dog wandering around outside the building. Emily's stomach tightened. Wandering? Alone? Jacob nodded. It wasn't like her. She would have never left him like that unless something happened. I didn't know what to do, so I brought him to the shelter. I figured it was better than him starving out there. The weight of Jacob's words hit Emily like a wave. Rebecca's sudden disappearance and the puppy's abandonment were pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to assemble. Did she say anything before she left? Anything that might explain what happened? She mentioned something about visiting her grandmother, Jacob said after a moment, but that's all I know. Look, I didn't want to get involved. I just did what I thought was right. Emily's mind raced. A grandmother, this could be a lead. Do you know where her grandmother lives? She asked. Jacob shook his head. I think it's somewhere upstate, but I can't say for sure. Though it wasn't much, the information gave Emily a sense of direction. Thank you for telling me, she said sincerely. You did the right thing bringing him to the shelter. Jacob shrugged, his expression softening. That dog deserves better than what he's been through. I hope you find Rebecca. Emily left the apartment feeling a mix of gratitude and urgency. Rebecca's grandmother might hold the key to understanding what had happened, but tracking her down would be no small task. Back at the shelter, Emily shared the update with Sarah. That's a big step forward, Sarah said, her eyes lighting up. Do you think we can find her grandmother? We have to try, Emily replied. I'll start by searching public records. If Rebecca's listed as a relative, we might be able to trace her family. The next few days were a blur of research. Emily combed through online directories, property records, and even social media profiles, piecing together fragments of Rebecca's life. Finally, she found a promising lead. A woman named Evelyn Harper living in a small town about 2 hours away. The address matched the description of an older home Rebecca had mentioned during her time at the shelter. This has to be it, Emily said, showing Sarah the information. Sarah smiled encouragingly. Go find her and take the puppy with you. Maybe seeing him will jog her memory. The next morning, Emily set out with the puppy in tow. The drive was long but scenic, the rolling hills and vibrant autumn foliage offering a momentary reprieve from the tension she felt. When she arrived at the address, she found a quaint, weathered house surrounded by a garden of overgrown flowers. An elderly woman was tending to the plants, her movements slow but deliberate. Emily approached cautiously, the puppy trotting beside her. Excuse me, she called out gently. Are you Evelyn Harper? The woman straightened, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied Emily. Who's asking? My name is Emily, she said, keeping her tone warm. I'm a volunteer at an animal shelter. I believe you're Rebecca Harper's grandmother. Evelyn's expression softened at the mention of Rebecca. Yes, I'm her grandmother. What's this about? Emily crouched to let the puppy step forward, his tail wagging tentatively. This little guy belonged to Rebecca. He's been waiting for her at the shelter, and I'm trying to bring them back together. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Oh my heavens, that's her dog. Tears welled in the elderly woman's eyes as she knelt to pet the puppy. Rebecca adored this dog. What's he doing at the shelter? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Emily explained. We heard she might have come here. Do you know where she is now? Evelyn hesitated, her gaze dropping to the puppy. She was here for a while, she said quietly, but then she left. She said she had to find work to help us both, but I haven't heard from her in weeks. I've been so worried. Emily's heart ached for Evelyn. Do you know where she went? She mentioned a city shelter where she could volunteer and stay temporarily, Evelyn replied. But she didn't give me the name. Emily nodded, her resolve strengthening. I'll find her, she promised, and I'll bring her back. Evelyn smiled through her tears. Bless you, child. Rebecca needs someone like you in her corner. Emily left Evelyn's house with a renewed sense of determination. Rebecca's decision to leave her grandmother behind to seek work spoke volumes about her character. It was clear that Rebecca loved her family and her puppy deeply, but had been forced into difficult circumstances. Now, Emily felt even more driven to reunite them. Back at the shelter, Emily sat with Sarah to discuss her next steps. Evelyns said Rebecca might be volunteering at a shelter in the city. Emily began, her voice firm. We need to narrow it down. Sarah nodded. There are a handful of city shelters within driving distance. Let's make a list and start calling. Together, they compiled a list of potential shelters. Emily began dialing, her heart pounding with each ring. Most of the calls ended the same way. Polite apologies and no sign of Rebecca. By mid-afternoon, frustration began to creep in. Maybe she didn't use her real name, Sarah suggested, her brow furrowed. It's possible, Emily admitted, but I don't want to give up yet. Someone must have seen her. Finally, on her sixth call, Emily struck gold. A volunteer coordinator at a small shelter in the city's outskirts hesitated when Emily mentioned Rebecca's name. Rebecca Harper, the woman repeated. That sounds familiar. Let me check our records. Emily held her breath as she waited. Moments later, the coordinator returned. Yes, she was here a few weeks ago. She stayed at our transitional housing program for volunteers. Do you know where she went? Emily asked eagerly. The coordinator paused. She mentioned moving to a larger shelter downtown to continue volunteering. I can give you their contact information. That would be amazing, Emily said, scribbling down the details. Thank you so much. Armed with the new lead, Emily wasted no time contacting the downtown shelter. This time, her luck held. A staff member confirmed that Rebecca had been volunteering there for the past month. Emily's heart soared. Is she there now? Emily asked, barely able to contain her excitement. She should be back later this afternoon, the staff member replied. You're welcome to stop by. Emily thanked them and immediately began preparing for the trip. She made sure the puppy was fed and rested, knowing he would play a crucial role in what came next. Before leaving, she glanced at Sarah, who gave her an encouraging smile. Go bring them back together, Sarah said. They both deserve this. The drive to the downtown shelter felt like an eternity. Emily's mind raced with thoughts of Rebecca's reaction. Would she recognize her puppy immediately? Would she be happy or overwhelmed by the sudden reunion? When Emily arrived, the bustling shelter was a stark contrast to the quiet rural facility she was used to. Volunteers rushed to and fro, tending to animals and managing adoptions. Emily approached the front desk, her pulse quickening. I'm here to see Rebecca Harper, she told the receptionist. The receptionist nodded. She's finishing up a shift in the kennels. I'll let her know you're here. Emily crouched beside the puppy, smoothing his fur as they waited. This is it, little guy, she whispered. You're finally going to see her again. Minutes later, a young woman with tired eyes and a warm smile emerged from the back. She froze mid-step when she saw the puppy. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. Blake, she whispered, her voice trembling. The puppy's ears perked up, and he let out an excited bark before racing toward Rebecca. She dropped to her knees, catching him in her arms as he covered her face with frantic kisses. Oh, my sweet boy, Rebecca sobbed, holding him tightly. I thought I'd lost you forever. Emily stood back, watching the emotional reunion unfold. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but it was the good kind, the kind that came from knowing she had done something that truly mattered. After a few moments, Rebecca looked up at Emily, her tear-streaked face radiant with gratitude. How did you find him? She asked. Emily smiled. He found me first, she said. He's been waiting for you outside the shelter every day. He never gave up on you. Rebecca buried her face in the puppy's fur, her shoulders shaking with emotion. I never wanted to leave him, she said, her voice muffled. But I had no choice. I couldn't afford to take care of him, and I thought leaving him at the shelter was the only way to keep him safe. He's safe now, Emily assured her, and he's missed you more than anything. Rebecca stood, still cradling the puppy. Thank you, she said earnestly. I don't know how to repay you for this. You don't have to, Emily replied. Just promise me you'll never let him go again. Rebecca nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I won't. Never again. The emotional reunion between Rebecca and her puppy, whom she affectionately called Blake, was just the beginning of their renewed journey together. But as the reality of their situation settled in, Rebecca's gratitude was accompanied by a touch of concern. "I want to take Blake home," Rebecca said softly, stroking his ears as he wagged his tail. "But I'm barely managing to make ends meet. I'm volunteering here and staying in temporary housing. How can I give him the life he deserves?" Emily placed a reassuring hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone," she said. "Let's figure this out together." Rebecca's story had touched Emily deeply, and she was determined to help her find stability. Emily began brainstorming ways to provide Rebecca with the support she needed to keep Blake by her side. The first step was to involve the shelter community. Back at the rural shelter, Emily shared Rebecca's story with Sarah and the other volunteers. They were moved by the tale of Blake's unwavering loyalty and Rebecca's sacrifices. Sarah proposed organizing a fundraiser to assist Rebecca in covering Blake's immediate needs, including food, veterinary care, and supplies. "We can host an adoption fair," Sarah suggested. "It'll draw attention to the shelter while also raising money for Rebecca and Blake." Emily loved the idea. "Let's make it happen," she said, her determination shining through. The shelter staff and volunteers quickly got to work, spreading the word about the upcoming event. Flyers were distributed, social media posts went viral, and local businesses pitched in by donating raffle prizes and supplies. The story of Blake waiting outside the shelter every day captured the community's hearts, and the response was overwhelming. The adoption fair turned out to be a massive success. Families flocked to the shelter, eager to meet the animals and support the cause. Children squealed with delight as they played with puppies and kittens, while potential adopters filled out applications to take their new furry friends home. Rebecca attended the event as a guest of honor, with Blake proudly by her side. She was initially overwhelmed by the attention, but Emily stayed close, offering encouragement. Together, they shared Blake's story with attendees, emphasizing the importance of supporting both animals and their humans in times of need. "I never thought so many people would care," Rebecca said to Emily, her eyes glistening with emotion as she watched donations pour in. "It feels like a dream." "It's because you and Blake inspired them," Emily replied. "Your bond is a reminder of what love and loyalty can accomplish." By the end of the day, the fundraiser had exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only had they raised enough money to cover Blake's immediate needs, but there was also a surplus that Rebecca could use to secure more permanent housing and explore career opportunities. The weeks that followed were transformative for Rebecca and Blake. With the support of the shelter community, Rebecca found a small apartment that allowed pets, giving her and Blake a safe and stable home. The sense of security brought a visible change in both of them. Rebecca's confidence grew, and Blake thrived in his new environment. Emily and Rebecca kept in touch, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Emily helped Rebecca apply for a paid position at the downtown shelter, leveraging her passion for animals and the experience she had gained as a volunteer. When Rebecca received the job offer, she was overjoyed. "This changes everything," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with gratitude during a call with Emily. "I can finally provide for Blake and myself." "I'm so proud of you," Emily replied. "You deserve this." As Rebecca settled into her new role, she and Blake became unofficial ambassadors for the shelter community. Rebecca shared her story with visitors, inspiring others to consider adoption and to see the potential in every stray animal. Blake, with his wagging tail and soulful eyes, became a symbol of resilience and unconditional love. One evening, Rebecca invited Emily to her apartment for dinner. It was a modest space, but it was filled with warmth and laughter. Blake greeted Emily with excited barks and enthusiastic tail wags, clearly remembering the woman who had reunited him with his favorite human. Over a simple meal, Rebecca opened up about her journey. "I was so close to giving up," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "But Blake never gave up on me. He kept waiting, believing we'd find each other again. And because of him, I found the strength to keep going." Emily smiled, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. "You both saved each other," she said. "That's what makes your story so special." Rebecca nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I wouldn't be here without you, Emily. You didn't just help me find Blake. You helped me find hope." As the night came to a close, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the moment she had spotted Blake waiting patiently outside the shelter to the heartwarming reunion with Rebecca, every step had been worth it. She had witnessed the transformative power of love, loyalty, and community, and it was a lesson she would carry with her forever. Rebecca's story, coupled with Blake's unwavering devotion, resonated far beyond the shelter's community. Emily was amazed by how quickly their journey had touched the hearts of so many. Social media posts about the adoption fair and Blake's loyalty went viral, garnering comments and shares from people all over the country. The outpouring of support and encouragement inspired Emily and the shelter team to think bigger. "We've seen what one story can do," Emily said during a meeting with the staff. "Imagine how many lives we can change if we share more stories like Rebecca and Blake's." Sarah, ever the strategist, chimed in. "What if we start a storytelling series? We could feature stories of animals and their humans, highlighting how their bonds have changed lives. It would bring attention to the shelter and encourage more adoptions." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "That's a fantastic idea. We can call it Tales of Hope. Each episode can focus on a different story, showing the impact of adoption and how it's about more than just giving animals a home. It's about creating a family." With the shelter's support, Emily spearheaded the project. She recruited a small team of volunteers with a knack for videography and storytelling. Rebecca and Blake became the first feature of Tales of Hope, sharing their incredible journey of resilience and love. The video was simple, yet deeply emotional. It began with footage of Blake waiting outside the shelter, his small frame braving the elements as staff and visitors passed him by. The scene then transitioned to Rebecca's tearful reunion with Blake, interspersed with her heartfelt narration about their struggles and triumphs. "When I thought I had lost everything, Blake reminded me of what truly matters," Rebecca said in the video. "He waited for me, even when I didn't think I was worth waiting for. He's not just my dog, he's my family." The video ended with a powerful message. Every animal deserves a chance. Every person deserves a second chance. Together, we can make it happen. The response was overwhelming. Within days of being posted online, the video had been viewed millions of times. Comments poured in from people who were moved to tears by Rebecca and Blake's bond. Many shared their own stories of adoption and how their pets had transformed their lives. The newfound attention brought a wave of support to the shelter. Donations increased dramatically, and adoption inquiries skyrocketed. Families visited the shelter, inspired by the stories they had seen, eager to create their own tales of hope and companionship. But the impact didn't stop there. Animal shelters across the country reached out to Emily, expressing interest in creating their own versions of Tales of Hope. They saw the potential of storytelling to foster empathy and connection, not just for animals, but for the humans who cared for them. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Blake continued to thrive. Rebecca's new job at the downtown shelter allowed her to channel her passion into meaningful work. She worked tirelessly to help animals find loving homes, often sharing her story with potential adopters. "Every animal here has a story," Rebecca would tell visitors. "They're just waiting for someone to take the time to listen." Blake became a regular presence at the shelter, serving as a living testament to the transformative power of love and loyalty. He had a special knack for comforting nervous animals, his calm demeanor putting them at ease. It wasn't long before he was unofficially dubbed the shelter's therapy dog. One day, as Rebecca walked Blake through the shelter, a young girl approached them hesitantly. She was holding her mother's hand, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Is that Blake?" the girl asked softly. Rebecca smiled and knelt down. "Yes, this is Blake. Would you like to pet him?" The girl nodded eagerly, her small hand reaching out to stroke Blake's fur. As she did, her mother explained that they were there to adopt a dog after losing their family pet months earlier. "I saw your story online," the mother said, her voice tinged with emotion. "So it gave me hope that we could find another companion to love." Rebecca felt a swell of pride and gratitude as she watched the girl bond with Blake. She knew that her story was making a difference, not just for her and Blake, but for countless others who needed a reminder of the beauty of second chances. Emily, too, was deeply moved by the ripple effect of Rebecca and Blake's story. She continued to pour her heart into Tales of Hope, capturing stories that celebrated the unique and powerful connections between animals and humans. Each video brought new challenges and triumphs, but Emily relished the opportunity to make a difference. She often thought about how one small puppy waiting outside a shelter had sparked a movement, changing lives in ways she never could have imagined. And though the work was demanding, Emily found solace in knowing that every story she told was another step toward a world where every animal had a chance to be loved, and every person had the chance to be loved back. The success of A Tales of Hope, it seemed unstoppable, and Emily, Rebecca, and the entire shelter team felt a renewed sense of purpose. But with increased attention came unforeseen challenges. One morning, as Emily arrived at the shelter, she noticed a group of reporters gathered outside. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust toward her as she stepped out of her car. "Emily, is it true the shelter has been accused of misusing funds?" one reporter called out. Another chimed in, "How do you respond to claims that the viral stories are fabricated?" Emily's heart sank. She hadn't anticipated this kind of scrutiny. "I'm sorry, I'm not aware of these accusations," she said, her voice calm but strained. "We'll issue a statement after reviewing the situation." Inside the shelter, Sarah was already pacing, her phone glued to her ear. "It's all over the news," she said, when Emily walked in. "Someone's accusing us of using the shelter for personal gain and fabricating the Tales of Hope stories." Emily clenched her fists, her mind racing. "Who would do this? Everything we've done is transparent. Rebecca and Blake's story is real. We've got the proof." Sarah nodded. "I know, but we need to act fast. Perception matters, and right now people are starting to doubt us." As the team regrouped, Rebecca arrived, visibly shaken. "I saw the news," she said, holding Blake close. "They're saying we made everything up. How could anyone think that?" Emily placed a reassuring hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "We'll get through this. We've worked too hard to let baseless accusations tear us down." The first step was damage control. Emily and Sarah drafted a statement addressing the allegations, providing documentation of the shelter's financial records and testimonials from adopters. They also reached out to their growing online community, asking for their support in sharing the truth. Rebecca, despite her initial apprehension, agreed to speak publicly about her journey. "People need to hear it from me," she said. "Blake's story is real, and I won't let anyone take that away from us." A press conference was arranged at the shelter. Reporters gathered in the courtyard as Emily took the podium. Behind her, a banner displayed the shelter's mission: "Every life matters." Emily's voice was steady as she spoke. "For years, this shelter has worked tirelessly to provide second chances for animals and their future families. The stories we've shared are real. The lives we've changed are real. And we stand by our mission with integrity and transparency." Rebecca followed, her voice trembling slightly but filled with conviction. "When I adopted Blake, I was at my lowest point. His loyalty pulled me out of despair and reminded me of my worth. I am living proof of what this shelter stands for, and I will not let anyone tarnish its name." Her words resonated deeply, and as she finished, the reporters erupted in applause. The moment was powerful, but Emily knew the battle wasn't over. Later that evening, Sarah discovered the source of the allegations: a former staff member who had been let go months earlier due to misconduct. Fueled by resentment, they had spread false rumors to discredit the shelter. Emily sighed heavily as she reviewed the findings. "We need to focus on moving forward," she said. "But we'll address this legally if we have to. We can't let bitterness undo the good we've done." The team rallied together, redoubling their efforts to ensure the shelter's mission remained at the forefront. Volunteers organized events to engage the community, and supporters online began sharing their own stories of how the shelter had impacted their lives. Despite the turmoil, Emily found solace in the moments she spent with the animals. One evening, as she sat in Blake's favorite spot by the shelter's garden, she watched him play with a new litter of puppies. His tail wagged furiously as he nudged the smallest pup forward, as if encouraging it to explore. Rebecca joined her, a soft smile on her face. "He's a natural caretaker," she said, sitting beside Emily. "It's like he knows they need someone to guide them." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "He's been through so much, but he still gives so freely. It's a reminder of why we do this, why it's worth fighting for." As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily felt a renewed sense of determination. The shelter's mission was bigger than any obstacle, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The shelter's darkest days slowly gave way to a renewed sense of hope as the team rallied together. Emily's leadership, combined with Rebecca's heartfelt advocacy, inspired others to stand in solidarity with the shelter. Supporters from all walks of life came forward, eager to protect the integrity of the shelter's mission and ensure its future. To counteract the negativity, Emily and Sarah decided to host a Day of Gratitude event at the shelter. It was designed to celebrate the lives transformed by the shelter's work and bring the community closer. "Let's remind everyone why this place matters," Emily said during a team meeting. "The best way to fight lies is with truth and love." The team worked tirelessly to prepare, decorating the shelter with strings of fairy lights and banners featuring photos of adopted pets and their families. Tables were set up with adoption stories printed on colorful cards, each one a testament to the shelter's impact. On the day of the event, the shelter bustled with energy. Families arrived with their adopted pets, sharing laughter and memories as they reunited with the staff who had helped them. Rebecca and Blake stood near the entrance, greeting visitors with warm smiles. Blake, now a symbol of resilience and loyalty, had become the star of the shelter. "Is that Blake?" a young boy asked, pointing excitedly. "The one from the video?" Rebecca knelt beside him. "Yes, this is Blake. He's very excited to meet you." The boy reached out tentatively, and Blake licked his hand gently, prompting a giggle. "He's a hero," the boy said, his eyes wide with admiration. As the event continued, Emily took the stage to address the crowd. She paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the sea of familiar and new faces. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "Today isn't just about celebrating the work we've done, it's about honoring the bonds we've created. This shelter isn't just a place for animals, it's a place for hope, second chances, and community." Her words were met with applause, and she continued, "When we face challenges, it's easy to feel defeated, but what I've learned is that together, we can overcome anything. Every one of you here today is proof of that." Rebecca stepped forward next, sharing her own journey once again. "Blake saved me," she said, her voice strong. "And this shelter gave us the chance to save each other. I'll always be grateful for that." One of the most poignant moments of the day came when Sarah announced the unveiling of the Wall of Loyalty, a tribute to the shelter's success stories. The wall featured framed photos of animals who had found their forever homes, alongside messages from their adopters. As Emily and Rebecca cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted in cheers. Families gathered to find their pets' photos, tears streaming down many faces as they read the heartfelt notes. "This is why we do what we do," Emily whispered to Sarah, her heart swelling with pride. But the most significant moment came toward the end of the day. A surprise announcement from a local philanthropist caught everyone off guard. Stepping onto the stage, the man introduced himself as a lifelong animal lover who had followed the shelter's journey. "I've been deeply moved by the stories I've seen," he said. "The way this shelter has persevered through adversity and continued to make a difference is nothing short of remarkable. That's why I'm proud to announce a donation to help fund a new expansion, so you can continue this incredible work." Gasps and applause filled the air as the man handed Emily a ceremonial check. The amount was enough to secure the shelter's financial stability for years to come. Emily, overwhelmed with emotion, thanked him profusely, her voice breaking with gratitude. "This isn't just about money," the man added. "It's about ensuring every animal has a chance to find a family, just like Blake did." As the event came to a close, the shelter team gathered for a quiet moment of reflection. Emily looked around at the smiling faces, the wagging tails, and the overwhelming sense of unity. "We did it," she said softly. "We turned something painful into something beautiful." Rebecca hugged her tightly. "Because you never gave up," she said. "None of us did." That evening, as Emily sat in her office, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The accusations, the struggles, and the triumphs had all shaped the shelter into what it was today. A beacon of hope for both animals and humans. Blake trotted in, curling up at her feet. Emily smiled, reaching down to scratch his ears. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said. Blake looked up at her with his soulful eyes as if to say, "Yes, and we're just getting started." The Day of Gratitude had left a profound impact on everyone involved, but the shelter's journey was far from over. As the shelter continued to thrive, a sudden twist reignited the tension. A whistleblower came forward, revealing the source of the smear campaign. An anonymous letter arrived at the shelter, detailing how a competitor had orchestrated the rumors to discredit Emily and the team. The letter included incriminating documents, emails, financial transactions, and even screenshots of discussions where the competitor explicitly targeted the shelter. The goal was clear: to undermine their reputation and monopolize local support for animal welfare. Emily stared at the letter in disbelief. "I knew something felt off," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and resolve. But to see it spelled out like this— Rebecca stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "This changes everything," she said. "We have the proof we need to clear our name." The team immediately convened to decide their next steps. Sarah, who had always been the pragmatic voice of reason, suggested taking the evidence directly to the community. "Transparency is key," she said. "If we let people see the truth, they'll understand what we've been up against." Emily agreed, but was hesitant about making the revelations too public. "We need to be careful," she said. "This isn't just about vindicating ourselves. It's about protecting the animals and ensuring we don't lose focus on our mission." After much deliberation, the team decided to host a press conference at the shelter. They invited local media, community leaders, and supporters to share their side of the story. On the day of the event, the shelter was abuzz with activity as reporters set up cameras and microphones. Emily took the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. Blake sat at her feet, his calm presence grounding her. She began by recounting the shelter's journey, the struggles they'd faced, the animals they'd saved, and the community they'd built. Then, she addressed the accusations. "For months, we've faced unfounded rumors and attacks on our integrity," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Today, we're here to set the record straight." Emily revealed the contents of the whistleblower's letter, displaying the documents on a screen for all to see. Gasps rippled through the audience as the extent of the competitor's deception became clear. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail. "To anyone who doubted us," Emily continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, "I hope this shows you that our commitment to this shelter and its mission has never wavered. We've always put the animals first, and we always will." Rebecca then stepped forward, sharing her personal story with Blake. "This shelter didn't just save him, it saved me," she said, her voice breaking. "The love and dedication here are real, and no amount of lies can take that away." The press conference ended with a standing ovation. Reporters lined up to ask questions, while supporters approached Emily and the team with words of encouragement. The shelter's name was finally cleared, and the community's trust was stronger than ever. But the competitors' actions couldn't go unpunished. The whistleblower's evidence was handed over to authorities, who launched a formal investigation. Within weeks, the competitor faced legal consequences for their actions, further solidifying the shelter's reputation as a pillar of integrity. As the dust settled, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. "We've been through so much," she said to the team during a quiet moment. "But this has only made us stronger." Sarah nodded. "And it's all thanks to your leadership and Blake's unwavering loyalty." Emily laughed softly, scratching Blake's ears. "He's the real hero," she said. "We wouldn't be here without him." With the shelter's name cleared and its mission reaffirmed, Emily and the team looked to the future with hope. Plans for expansion resumed, and the shelter began reaching out to neighboring communities to share their story and resources. Blake, ever the symbol of resilience and loyalty, continued to inspire everyone he met. Whether greeting visitors at the shelter or accompanying Emily to events, his presence reminded everyone of the power of compassion and perseverance. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in months, the path ahead felt clear. Emily, Rebecca, and the team knew there would always be challenges, but they also knew they could face anything together. And with Blake by their side, they felt unstoppable. The press conference marked a turning point for the shelter. With their reputation restored, the team was more determined than ever to continue their mission. Blake became a local legend, a symbol of resilience and unconditional love. People flocked to the shelter, not only to meet him but to offer their support. In the weeks following the event, donations poured in, allowing the shelter to expand its facilities and rescue more animals in need. Emily and Rebecca worked tirelessly, organizing adoption drives, educational workshops, and community events. The once overlooked shelter was now a beacon of hope and compassion. One sunny afternoon, Emily stood outside the shelter watching as a group of children toured the facilities. Blake trotted alongside them, wagging his tail and eliciting giggles from the young visitors. Emily couldn't help but smile. "This is what it's all about," she said to Rebecca, who stood beside her. "Creating a place where people and animals can find hope and healing." Rebecca nodded. "And it's all because of you. And Blake." Emily knelt beside Blake, scratching his ears. "You're the heart of this place, aren't you, boy?" she said softly. Blake responded with a happy bark, as if agreeing. The shelter continued to grow, not just in size but in its impact on the community. Families who had adopted pets shared their stories of joy and transformation, creating a ripple effect of goodwill. The bond between humans and animals was stronger than ever, thanks to the shelter's unwavering commitment. One evening, as Emily sat on the porch of the shelter with Blake by her side, she reflected on how far they had come. From that cold, rainy night when she first saw him waiting outside, to the challenges they had faced and overcome together, the journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. "You've changed everything," she whispered to Blake, her voice filled with gratitude. "For me, for this shelter, and for everyone who's met you." Blake rested his head on her lap, his quiet presence a reminder of the incredible journey they had shared. If Blake's story touched your heart, we invite you to join us in making a difference. Every animal deserves a chance to find love and a home, just like Blake did. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of resilience and hope. And don't miss our next heartwarming tale. It's one you won't want to miss. Click now to watch and be part of the journey. Together, we can create a brighter future for every animal in need.